CB, I want to come to you now and address the issue of what you believe the finance minister is likely to take up, or what is likely, what is feasible. And one of the big concerns, or one of the big questions in everybody's mind, is that whether there will be any change as far as the capital gains tax regime is concerned. I know we have a lot of tax experts here in this room as well, but CB, what's industry's expectation? What's industry's view on this? You just have to put the microphone closer to you.
Yeah, thanks, Shereen. No, I think on capital gains, what we have actually said is basically for simplification. There are a number of rates, it's much complex at this point in time. So our suggestion has been mainly around a recommendation, mainly around simplification. But that's as far as capital gains is concerned. But really speaking, our focus has been much on certain areas, which is taking it on from there. There's a lot being done on decriminalization, a lot being done on ease of doing business, but I think there needs to be much more focus on decrim, especially for the small and the mid-sized companies. That's one. Second, we've also talked about something, which is like an ease of doing business, the national single window scheme, say, for instance, that really becoming much more of a single window in terms of the states.
When we've talked about this previously as well, over years and years and years, does it matter whether you have a central level single window? Because at the end of the day, most of your regulatory approvals, your licenses, etc., come at the state level, and a lot of states have actually moved on single window clearances already.
Yeah. A lot of states have moved on single window clearances, but there are a lot more to be done at the state level, and the issue is state level. And so, therefore, a lot of our reforms today are also at the state level, whether it is power, land, labor. So we've also talked about really this budget giving a roadmap. Much of it cannot be in the budget, but even a sort of a signal on how the GST-like collaborations that has happened with the states could be even taken forward in these areas. These mean a lot for when we hear Mukundan talking about jobs. Jobs are really going to come from the mid-size and the small companies, and unless we make it easier for them to operate, we are always going to see that lag. So lastly, I think staying on the jobs, we have suggested something like you talked about PLI, we've talked about an ELI, an employment linked.
And this is not the first time CII suggested an ELI. So you're hoping that this time around the finance minister will take that forward. But I will come back to the ELI question in just a second. But let me go across to Vinayak Chatterjee because Mr. Mukundan also spoke about how, and Sanjeev spoke about the fact that government capex should continue to be driven. You were disappointed with the number in the interim budget. I remember that very, very distinctly because you were sitting with me when the announcement came in, Vinayak. What's the expectation this time around? Do you believe that, and many estimates do believe that perhaps there's been a plateauing now and we cannot expect the government to continue to throw significantly higher numbers on public capex. What's the expectation?
Just the reverse.
The mic. Yes. Go ahead.
This is on now.
Yeah.
Just the reverse of what you said. First, to clarify on the interim budget, I had no expectations because it was an interim holding operation, some kind of an arithmetical exercise. So let that pass. The important point on the outlays is in the starting of the meeting, the remark was made, I think Sanjeev Puri made the remark that in terms of fiscal space, whether it is the buoyancy of revenue, of GST revenue collections, or the extra amount received from the RBI, the government is actually sitting on the fiscal space where it can actually not hold back but do more. The macroeconomic maths is very clear. The government shared last year in interactions with you, a very, very senior functionary, I won't take the name because you know.
I know who you mean, yes.
Shared the fact that they have a confidential report that says that rupees spent on public works or infrastructure results in 3 rupees of GDP. Whereas 1 rupee spent on schemes of like DBT, direct benefit transfer, results in 90 paisa of GDP. So the macroeconomic maths is very clear. If they do not increase the capex spend on infrastructure by 30% this year, from 10 lakhs crores, which was the full year budget last year, to 13, which is my expectation this year, a 30% increase, consistent with the last 2 years. The last 2 years has been 25-30%. You are not going to get 8% GDP growth because with private capex still not quite taking off, it is only public expenditure and infra spends that is going to pump prime the economy. So the maths is very clear. If you don't increase the infra capex by 30%, you may not get 8% GDP growth. It's as crystal clear as that.
Okay, if the math is so clear that the government needs to continue to pump prime the economy by spending more on infrastructure and public capex, Puneet Chatwal, what is holding back the private sector from investing more? If the mood is good, and the finance minister several times over has said we're waiting for the private sector to unleash its animal spirits, what's holding back the animal spirits?
Shereen, I have a different opinion. I think we are doing well versus others post-COVID. So first thing we have to take into account, is there enough investment in India? The answer is yes. I just came back from Europe, and I can tell you things don't look that good out there. We can do much more, as Vinayak just alluded to, in terms of infrastructure. But there are several sectors, and I definitely represent the tourism and hospitality. I think it's high time that looking at 2047 and what we call the Amrit Kal era, I think it's a great opportunity that the government has to invest in this sector because of its ability to create the significant multiplication in jobs. So what has been proven worldwide is every job created in this sector creates 8 to 12 jobs in other sectors. So I think that is... So
specifically, what would the travel, hospitality, tourism sector want from the budget?
Well, we have not said any kind of financial assistance that is needed. It's the positioning of the sector. The perception that this is luxury and discretionary has to go, because
Which comes down to GST.
Not really GST. Of course, the alignment of GST would help. A lovely, expensive standalone restaurant pays only 5% and the hotels pay 18%. I think that alignment is definitely overdue and needed. But I think giving this sector, again, coupling with what Vinayak said, the full infrastructure status would bring in a lot of investments, not only from within India, but from outside of India. And giving it an industry status at the state levels, which many states have done, will make the cost of doing business more efficient, so more and more investment will happen.
Okay, you're also in line, like I know Satish Reddy and the healthcare sector have been asking for infrastructure status, industry status for healthcare and pharma as well. John Major Sinha, let me come to you now. What's the expectation overall as far as the financial sector is concerned? Do you expect any significant announcements in this budget? And essentially, when we talk about privatization, while there is a stated policy intent to privatize, the government has not moved the legislative amendments to ensure that the banking sector does see any kind of privatization. Should we put that to rest for now?
So, on a lighter note, I must say that I caution any bank or NBFC with a high price to book. Because if they get a high price to book, the RBI is going to come after them, like HDFC, Kotak, Bajaj, etc. So I just caution them, keep your price to book low, otherwise the regulator is coming. And in terms of, financial sector, look, there are, just now the overall holding of the government in public sector banks is 70%. If it was to just come down to 50%, we wouldn't have any risk. I mean, they would have the same control and there would be no, and right now the price to book is almost getting close to 1.8. So there's a lot of money out there and we can do that in stages. Of course, my wish, which has stayed unrequited, is to get them below 50 and above 26%. But that is unlikely. But there is one more thing, and I hope and pray at some point we take on at a mission level, which is water. If India collapses, it will not be because of jobs, it will be because of water. And the urgency of water is getting more and more strident. And we need an infrastructure kind of thinking on water, which we are struggling to do, of course, because it's state and center. But if we don't take it on, I really worry about the country itself.
No, you're absolutely right in pointing that out. It's not just water, but issues like pollution, etc., also need to be addressed with the same kind of urgency as we talk about tax-related matters. But Venkat, let me come to you now. On the tax front, what's the expectation? The assumption is that perhaps this will be the budget that finally the middle class will be given some relief, or at least to make the new tax regime a lot sweeter. There could be something that the government does. What's your own expectation, at least on the tax front and capital gains specifically as well? You'll have to come closer to the mic.
Well, I think that, yes, to a certain class of taxpayers, yes, there will be a little more generosity. There is absolutely no doubt. I would also be interested to see that now when the government is thinking about not the issue of sending workers out to work in other countries. Very interesting that we're looking in terms of sending people overseas to work at a point when we are also facing shortages here, as to whether they will look in terms of how they incentivize them as well. On capital gains, yes, the rumors have been around, and you always have the alarmists, especially in good times, and sometimes you just hope that there's status quo then. Apart from the fact that Chandrajit did say very rightly that there is a bit of streamlining that needs to be done. On infrastructure...
Do you and expect them to move on holding periods this time? Or do you believe that it might be much more of a signal saying, look, it is something that we will look at?
Well, I wouldn't like to speculate, and I don't think people would want to boil the ocean at this stage, I would hope. So I actually would like us to have a larger global outlook, like even when we talked about the banks, for example, the point that Janmajay makes is right. But we should also be looking at aspirations of having more meaningful banking, global banking and insurance institutions.
Yeah.
I know there was talk about even looking in terms of professional services as to how we go more global.
Right.
But certainly I think some incentives to make Indian companies and institutions more global would be helpful.